In Module 2, we had a discussion board regarding learning and routines because the title of Module 2 is Caregiving as a Curriculum. So when we talk about our daily routines with infants and toddlers, so kids up to 3 years old, the learning and the exploration and so much of what a child is good for a child, appropriate for the child, really can be incorporated in their daily life. It doesn't have to be orchestrated or some special event or activity. Remember, it goes back to that whole idea of just happenings, the happenings of the day, if you will. And so you were given a list of routines. Some of those routines are appropriate just for infants. Some of those routines are appropriate just for toddlers. Some of it overlaps. And so here I actually separated out the list from the discussion board. In order to do this assignment correctly, you had to get out your Kansas Early Learning Standards. If you do not have a physical copy of that document, you need to pull it off the internet. And you can use the link that's in class. You can Google Kansas Early Learning Standards and the PDF will come up. So here I have done that. I have pulled up the Kansas Early Learning Standards online. And we're going to walk through 3 examples for the discussion board of what I expected, because we as a class struggled with this assignment. And I'm actually going to give you an extra credit opportunity here. First picture is a group of toddlers. So these are children that are about 26 months old in this picture. You will see here, if I go to the Approaches to Learning, I scroll down to Approaches to Learning, I started reading the standards. And at this time, I decided to use the standard area of emphasis. So engagement and attention. Here, I've highlighted an actual benchmark. So those are very age specific and they're very sequential. These are broader umbrellas, engagement and attention. And so for this example, I'm going to use the areas, the substandards. These are umbrellas. And I first chose engagement and attention because if I read the infant, mobile infant, and toddler benchmarks, they are all found in mealtime routines regardless of age. So this specific example shows 26-month-old children, but my discussion board would talk about in depth how engagement and attention and persistence are taught. Persistence in continuing to get the liquid out of the bottle, to reproduce that pleasure of the taste as well as filling up the stomach. From a mobile infant, the success of getting food from the tray to the mouth and continuing that and that taste again, to the toddler that is engaging in the activity is going to be distracted by others, but then come back to it more easily without having to be redirected all the time. Where your mobile infant's going to have you'll tap the tray where their food is sitting, or you might have to give them a little bit more food or pick up a spoon and give them a little bit of food to try and get them going. So you're building that persistence. So it's a very sequential stair-step situation. And so you approach the mealtime in a very sequential way with children of how much you support them, where they're allowed to sit, how much you do for them versus they do for themselves. And so it's really easy to see that engagement and attention and persistence are very much encouraged and developed through quality mealtime routines. Additionally, physical and health. So fine motor. So you scroll down and we go and we find the fine motors. And again, all of this is very much encouraged with quality mealtime routines. And in my discussion board, I would describe a few of those. The pincer grasp, using utensils, the eye-hand coordination to get the food from the tray or the plate to the mouth, and how that works. Additionally, you're teaching nutritional behaviors. Simple food choices. So with toddlers, you might ask, do you want carrots or do you want celery? Do you want more lunch meat or do you want more potatoes? So you might give simple choices. Kids start liking certain foods and wanting certain foods, but yet we're also still encouraging other foods. Okay? Then we go to social and emotional. There are multiple standards or benchmarks in each standard area, domain, that would work in this situation, but you only need to name one or two. And so you don't need to overdo. Overdo is not more here. It's being more articulate and connecting specifically to the Kansas Early Learning Standards, which is directly connected to ages and stages of development in a scientific way. And that was the point of the whole discussion board. It's the point of really understanding and embracing the idea of happenings and caregiving as a curriculum. So same with communication and literacy. The idea of comprehension and collaboration, we go down here. I'll skip social emotional because I think you're probably starting to get the point. And here again, if I read these three first benchmarks, you would have conversation, you would be answering simple questions. Do you want more? The child would be using language or gestures to communicate wants and needs. Point in case, she's using the more sign. And then math. I say compare numbers, and you think, really? She's going to compare to 2 versus 4? No, that is not what's happening here. If we go down to the math standard and we look under compare numbers, you will often find infants. You know, they're holding the bottle, sometimes with 2 hands, sometimes with 1 hand, and they'll pick a toy, or they'll play with a hair or have a favorite doll in their hand, which progresses into how do they get, when you have a toddler sitting in there in the high chair or a mobile infant, and they have food in each hand, but yet they want the different food that's on their tray, and they have to figure out, how do I get that different food? And we've all giggled as we watch a kid try and figure that out. Sometimes they end up dropping both to pick up the one, or sometimes they'll put the other, what's in one hand, and put 2 things in one hand so they have an empty hand. Sometimes they'll drop what's in one hand and pick up something that's on the tray. So again, it's a progression that we see. That's what comparing numbers looks like in infants and toddlers. Okay, so then let's go to another example. This is a picture right after nursing. And so what does nursing, what does that incorporate with children? Well, for that little infant, this is day-old infant here, is that she's learning to comfort herself by cooing and babbling and mouthing a favorite object. And yes, at that age, nursing is going to be a favorite object. And that's definitely how a baby soothes themselves. And it's a very appropriate way for a baby to soothe themselves. They're going to communicate hunger, and when they're full, pulling away or getting fussy. If you try and put them in the nursing position and they're not hungry, a baby will fuss. And so these are important communication things that are happening, and that's a physical development. That's the nutrition benchmark for a young infant. A social emotional benchmark is that they're going to initiate and engage in reciprocal behaviors or interactions. So the baby's going to initiate when the baby's hungry. somehow getting that adult's attention. And babies will do it different ways in different settings, and different babies do it in different ways. And also, they're going to participate in that routine, and they're going to interact with the adult. The adult should be making faces and talking and soothing that child as well, engaging in the daily routine. Communication and literacy, listening and beginning to respond to familiar sounds, using gestures, movements, or vocalizations to gain attention of a familiar person. And then math, right? Nursing, math for a baby, what? They're beginning to go through and learn that initiated, repeated movements, the sucking, gets you what you want, gets you satisfaction. It's another great example of this is when you take a baby who's only been nursed and you're trying to introduce a bottle. Maybe mom's going back to work, mom wants some freedom. It's a very natural, important thing to happen. And so that baby learning that interaction with the bottle and transferring that information to the and generalizing it to the nursing is a math concept. Is that repeated cause and effect. Another example, this is a toddler again, and this would be just younger than 2 years old. So we're probably looking at about 20 months old here. And he is standing in a freshly tilled spring garden. That's a muddy mess. He is learning to, in this situation and environment, he's going to imitate others in using objects in new and different ways, whether it's a shovel or a rake or watching you pull the cord on the tiller and trying to get that tiller started and working on it, or cleaning the bottom of the tiller. And he's going to start imitating all of those activities. Walking through that muddy garden, which he does, and then he loses his shoes because they get stuck in the mud. He's learning to maintain balance. He's building up his leg strength, and that all directly related to a very specific benchmark. He's coordinating the use of his arms and hands to accomplish more complex tasks. So he's using you can see his hands have been in the mud. And as you continue gardening with him, digging holes in certain areas, having to dig further down, having to not dig as deep. Those are kinds of things that he's kind of learning to do with you. He's going to express preferences. He's going to expect preferences for the texture of the mud, to the activity, to what you're planting, and expressing those, and having to deal with boundaries that the adult is setting and how he's going to respond to those boundaries. You're going to use words to action labels. He's going to express wants and needs, likes and dislikes, and you're going to speak in a very familiar way with each other. And lastly, with math, you're going to start using words to describe measurable attributes. Oh, that bucket of water is so heavy. This bucket is empty and it's really light. Why don't you carry this bucket? You know, oh, this little spade is easier to carry because it's not as long. I'll carry the big shovel. So those kinds of math words all of a sudden are getting introduced as well. So these 3 examples are what I expect when you're analyzing the caregiving as a curriculum. That is what's meant by this. So it's very age appropriate. Sometimes you can have an umbrella discussion of mealtime in general, or you can get much more specific of what's age appropriate, and you're going to discuss actual benchmarks from the Kansas Early Learning Standards. So most everyone lost points on that discussion board in Module 2. But regardless, everybody has the opportunity to gain 30 extra credit points. 30 extra credit points is essentially a third of a letter grade. I will not offer very many extra credit opportunities. This is one guaranteed opportunity. I may or may not offer a second one during this semester. So if you want this, take advantage of it. You need to go to my grades and you need to read my comments on your Module 2 discussion board thread. Step 2, you need to go to Module 4, and there will be an assignment link in Module 4 called Extra Credit. And you will rewrite your Module 2 discussion board thread, and you will use the same routine that you chose in that discussion board thread. Step 3, you will analyze one additional routine from the list, but you may not use gardening with toddlers, nursing, or mealtime with toddlers. You have to choose something different. Even though there's other learning opportunities within those routines, you have to do something different. So you will have a total of 2 routines that you analyze. Be sure to use specific benchmarks and standards. Pull out your standards. Make sure your connections are age appropriate. If you're talking about activities for preschoolers, you will not get points. We are talking about infants and toddlers. Toddlers are not preschoolers. Preschoolers are 3 and 4-year-olds. We're talking about children who are 0, 1, and 2 years old. And be sure you connect to what we have learned in class. When you go to the link in Module 4, it will only say extra credit. You have to come to this video for the information. So you could pull this up on YouTube after you've watched the whole thing and then freeze it on this last screen to help you remember what you're to do.